I'm continually amazed by the diversity of Oklahoma's native habitats. Here I am in southern McCurtain County in a landscape that I might expect to find in Florida. There's a wonderful population of native palms here, and joining me today to talk about these is Wes Lanphier. Wes, this is a wonderful place. Thank you so much for inviting us here.
You're welcome. I'm glad you could come and be a part of it.
Now, you're a native plant enthusiast and you've been growing native palms for a number of years. Tell me a bit about these interests of yours.
Well, these interests started back when I lived up north, and I decided to move down to Oklahoma, and I found that there is a native palm from Oklahoma. And so we did some research and decided to come and find those here in McCurtain County. And we found this place a few years ago and have been back a few times since then to study and to check on them a few times since then.
And that's pretty remarkable, knowing that worldwide there's somewhere around 2,500 species of palms, but in the U.S. we have just a handful. And how many here in Oklahoma?
We have one.
Just one.
Right.
And it is the sable minor, it's the
Sable
scientific name, or the dwarf palmetto.
Dwarf
right?
palmetto. Some people refer to it as a dwarf blue palmetto as well.
Oh, it does have a beautiful bluish tinge to the leaves, especially on the older leaves, and if you get in the sunlight you can see that a bit more. Now tell me a bit about the growing conditions. This is a hardy palm. It's going to survive freezing temperatures.
Yes, it does. Actually, it's an evergreen plant, even here in most parts of Oklahoma. It's very hardy. We've experienced lows of 0 or some places even just below with these plants, and they do make it through there with a little bit of damage, some browning on the tips of the leaves, or even a few spots here and there on the leaves, but they don't lose their leaves. They're a very hardy plant from that standpoint, primarily because the plant does not grow an above ground trunk.
Okay, the growing point is below the soil,
Right.
and as long as that's not damaged, it'll continue to put on new growth.
If somebody did defoliate the whole plant, it could still regenerate as long as the growth point wasn't disturbed.
Excellent. And now you mentioned these are evergreen. With a plant like this is a wonderful specimen. Most of these leaves are a few years old.
Right. These leaves here on the outer edges especially could be several years old, especially in a plant this size with the age that it has. And then as you get down toward the center, you can see here actually is a good example of it. This is a very new leaf, the most recent leaf that the plant has put out. And it's not similar to the others yet in that it's not split, but it will have that same exact characteristic as it grows out a little bit further.
As it opens, it'll start to split apart.
Correct.
How many leaves does the palm put on each year?
Most of these will probably add 2 or 3 leaves a year. They're not a fast-growing plant. They are somewhat slow-growing, but that also helps attribute to its cold hardiness. But these are a long-living plant as well. They aren't something that's going to be around in a landscape or an area like this for just a few years, 5 or 10 years. These have been here for a long, long time.
And now you mentioned the landscape. These are certainly something we can use ornamentally. I know you have a number of them planted in your own landscape. What areas do they perform best? I know that they'll grow in the sun, they'll grow in the shade. Tell me about their growth habits in these environments.
I would say that because of the nature of where we're finding them in a native habitat, having some shade is best. However, I've experienced and I've seen in other places in the landscape where they can grow in full sun, and they do well there. They might not get quite as large, they may be a little more shrubby, but they will grow there as well, and a little supplemental water won't hurt in that position.
Okay, well let's look at some of the life stages of the plants and how they can be propagated.
Excellent, we'll take a look.
Now Wes, you've been collecting seed from these mature plants for a number of years for propagation. And that's the best method you found for reproducing the palmetto. That's
correct. The seeds, as you can see here, would really be the best way to go. What most people have found is in an area like this where you see several small plants, there may be a temptation to try to come in and take 1 or 2 of those out, but due to the way the root system is, and if that is disturbed or cut in any way, it's very difficult to get them to transplant at that point. So growing from seed is really the best way to go.
And the plants produce a great number of seeds. I saw these long seed heads. I imagine there's several hundred seeds per plant.
Right, yeah. Most of the real mature plants will put 2 or 3 at least seed stalks, and each of those stalks could contain 2 to 3 or as many as 500 seeds each.
Wonderful. And the seeds right now from last year are on the ground and they're germinating. And let's take a look at some of the young palmettos we have growing here. They don't really look much like what we were just standing in front of.
Right. These little guys right here probably sprouted up just last year, and you can see that they made it through the winter just fine. There's a couple of leaves on those. They look like really wide grass that's growing out, but there's a small serration in the center of the leaf that really gives it its palm identity.
You could feel that as you run your finger over it. And then growing next to it are some older plants.
Right. I would suggest that these are probably another year or two older than the smaller one there. And again, the leaf getting a little bit wider. And again, the serration, it's like a little fold that's in the center of the leaf that's bringing it up, and still there, very characteristic of the plant. And then actually right over to the side,
we have some older plants in here.
That's where we're going to start to notice this thing is going to look a little bit more like a palm, because we're getting that palm look to this leaf as it splits down the center here. This probably in the neighborhood of 4 or maybe going into its 5th year at this stage right here.
And we're seeing the greater splitting of the leaves as it's aging.
Correct.
Less grass-like looking.
And a little more elongated with the stem or the petiole of the leaf right here until we get to the mature stage. And you can clearly see that that's identified as a palm. It's a palmate leaf on it. It is very recognizable for most people.
Absolutely. Wes, when is the plant mature enough to produce seed?
Usually a plant would need to be about 5 or 6 years old when it's getting the fully split leaves before it will start to go ahead and produce the seed.
Okay, and they produce independent flower stalks that come from the base, is that right? Right,
yeah, similar to what we're seeing on this one. Around the sides of the base in kind of the mid part of the spring, it'll start to send this flower stalk up there, and it'll grow quickly at that point. And maybe in late May and June is when the flowers will go ahead and start to open. There'll be a small white flower, and has just a touch of fragrance to it as well. And that'll open about that point before moving to this stage. And you can see the seed starting to develop on this one. This is again in the neighborhood of late June, early July, and then that will become mature where we see that dark purple to dark brown mature seed in mid to late October.
I imagine all this seed is attractive to some wildlife out here.
Correct. Yeah, we've found or understand that many different types of birds are attracted to these, and they'll help to spread the seed in an area like this as well. And then as they mature, they get a little bigger and heavier. That whole thing may droop down a little bit, and some of the smaller mammals may be attracted to it as well as a food source.
Okay. Now we were talking earlier about using the palms in the landscape, and you know, of course we're in a very wet environment right now, but they'll actually tolerate a little bit of drought conditions as well.
That's right. An established plant, once they get to this size or this age, are very drought tolerant. They don't mind extra water, but it's not necessary for them.
Well, that certainly makes it well adapted for Oklahoma.
It certainly does.
Thank you so much for sharing this very special place with us.
Glad to be here, and thank you for the opportunity.